In September of 2021, I went on a 7-day cruise from Miami through the Western Caribbean with my girlfriend and her extended family. It was the kind of vacation you book to reset from a hectic year filled with cocktails, sunburns and buffet lines. The ship was enormous, 14 decks, multiple pools and more amenities than some small towns. Everything seemed perfect at first until the second night when I got lost. I had left the casino around midnight after a few too many drinks and tried to make my way back to our stateroom. But somehow I ended up on the wrong floor, deck 6 instead of deck 9. The elevators weren't working right, so I decided to take the long hallway and find another set of stairs. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a corridor on the left, slightly narrower than the rest, dimmer too. It looked like a service hallway at first, but curiosity got the better of me. As I turned into it, I realized the carpet changed under my feet. It was older, more faded, like it hadn't been replaced with the rest of the ship. The lights buzzed quietly above, and all the staterooms along the corridor looked identical, except one. About halfway down the hall, I passed a door that didn't have a number. Every other cabin had one, 6034, 6036, and so on. But this door was blank. No peephole, no keypad. Just a heavy metal door with a tiny scratch in the paint that looked vaguely like a handprint. I stared at it longer than I should have. There was a hum coming from behind it, like a low mechanical whine that didn't match the steady thrum of the ship's engines. I thought maybe it was a maintenance room, but then I saw the light underneath the door flicker, like someone was walking back and forth inside. I was about to knock, for no reason I can explain, when I felt this pressure in my chest. Not fear, something else, like I was being watched from the other side of the door. I backed away slowly and didn't stop until I reached the stairwell. The next morning I tried to find that hallway again. I even checked the ship's floor plan on the interactive directory in the lobby. But that side corridor didn't exist. Deck 6 was all guest cabins and a staff-only section I couldn't access. When I asked a crew member about it, he just smiled awkwardly and told me maybe I dreamed it. I dropped it. 2 nights later, I couldn't sleep. Something kept waking me up every hour. Soft knocks, or maybe tapping, though every time I sat up, the cabin was quiet. At 3:43 a.m., I heard something unmistakable, a click like a door unlocking. I got up and opened our stateroom door to the hallway. It was empty, except for a woman standing about 10 feet down barefoot, her long hair soaking wet like she had just come out of the pool. But there was no pool on our floor. She didn't look at me. She just slowly turned and walked down the hall, not toward the elevator, toward the stairs, toward deck 6. I didn't follow. I shut the door and locked every latch I could. The next day, I tried again to find the corridor. This time, I waited until late and slipped past a crew-only door near the laundry chute. And it was there, the faded carpet, the humming lights, and the door with no number. But now the door was open, just a crack. Inside, it was pitch black. The smell that hit me was like seawater and mold, thick enough to make me gag. I leaned in, phone flashlight shaking in my hand, and scanned the room. It wasn't a cabin. It looked more like a gutted space. Bare walls, no bed, no furniture, just a chair in the center of the room facing the wall. And on that wall was a mirror, except it didn't reflect anything. Not me, not the light. It was just black, a depthless void. Then something moved in the mirror, not in the room, in the reflection. I backed out, slammed the door, and sprinted out of that hallway like the ship was on fire. I never told my girlfriend or her family. I didn't want to ruin the trip, but the last night of the cruise, just before disembarkation, I ran into that same crew member I'd spoken to earlier. I mentioned the no-number cabin one more time. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "We don't assign that room, we can't." When I asked why, he paused, then said, "Because someone once opened the mirror." That was all he gave me before walking away. A few days after we got back, I checked the ship's forums online. Buried deep in a thread from years ago was a single comment about the cabin that doesn't exist. People speculated everything from electrical issues to a sealed-off crime scene. But one post said something I can't stop thinking about. It said, "If you ever find it, don't look into the mirror, it remembers you." In April of 2022, I boarded a cruise ship departing from Galveston, Texas, for a 5-night journey through the Gulf. It was my first cruise, a spontaneous trip I booked after a rough breakup and a burnout stretch at work. I wanted to unplug, no cell reception, no responsibilities, just ocean views and anonymous peace. For the first 2 days, that's exactly what I got. Drinks, Sun, late-night walks on the upper decks, and a stateroom with a private balcony where I could sit and lose hours staring at the waves. On the third night, I met her. She introduced herself as Elise. I'd gone to the buffet late, around 9:30 p.m., and we both reached for the last brownie at the same time. We laughed, made small talk, and ended up walking the deck for an hour. She said she was traveling alone too, wore a vintage sun hat, had deep grey eyes, and always looked like she was listening to something just beyond the edge of sound. But there was something captivating about her, something familiar that I couldn't place. We ran into each other again the next morning at breakfast, and again that evening during a live music show. It started feeling like more than coincidence. She invited me to the forward deck, deck 14, usually quiet and empty at night. She said it was her favourite spot because no one else ever came there after dark. The wind was brutal up there, sharp and constant, but she didn't seem to notice. She just stood by the railing, eyes on the water, smiling, like she belonged out there more than inside. We talked about everything, cities we'd lived in, dreams, strange childhood memories. But when I asked about her cabin, she hesitated, then said she didn't like going back there, that it felt heavy, like she wasn't supposed to be in it. I asked what room it was. She changed the subject. Later that night, I walked her back to her floor, deck 9. We stopped by the elevators, and as they opened, I turned to say something else, but she was gone, just not there anymore. I checked the hallway, empty. She hadn't entered the elevator, hadn't walked off. It was less like she'd left, and more like she'd blinked out of existence. The next day I asked around casually, trying not to sound weird. Wait staff, entertainment staff, even the stateroom attendant for deck 9. No one had seen or heard of an Elise traveling solo. I even checked the passenger activity list. They sometimes posted group photos or dining check-ins. Nothing. I started wondering if I had hallucinated her, but I still had her room number scribbled in my phone. 9047. I know because she had typed it in herself when she gave it to me, telling me to knock sometime if I wanted to talk more. So that night I did. Cabin 9047 didn't exist. There was 9045. Then a maintenance panel, then 9049. No gap, no 9047. I stood there staring at the wall, confused and increasingly unsettled. Another passenger walked by, gave me a weird look, and I pretended I had lost something. I checked the other side of the hallway. Same, just even-numbered rooms. No 9046 or 9048 to match. I went back to my room and tried to forget about it, but around 2:15 a.m. I was jolted awake by a knock. 3 quick, sharp knocks. I pulled open the door, expecting to see Elise. No one was there, but in the center of the hallway, soaking wet, was her sun hat. I hadn't seen her wear it since our first walk. I picked it up, damp, heavy, and ice-cold. I took it to the front desk the next morning, asking if anyone had turned in a lost hat. The clerk barely glanced at it before saying, "That belongs to a guest who isn't with us anymore." When I asked what she meant, she lowered her voice and said, "You should let it go, sir." That afternoon, the ship made an unexpected stop. A small Coast Guard vessel had pulled alongside, and there was an unannounced search being conducted. They wouldn't say what for. People speculated someone had gone overboard, but there was no official announcement. I overheard one crew member whispering to another, saying, "That's the second time this year. Same deck." The night before we docked back in Galveston, I had one last walk on the forward deck. It was just as quiet, just as windy. I stood at the railing where Elise and I had talked. For a second, I thought I saw her standing near the edge again. Same hat, same long hair. But when I blinked, she was gone. When I got home, I couldn't let it go. I called the cruise line, gave them her name, the room number, and the dates. They told me they had no record of any guest by that name. No one assigned to cabin 9047 because cabin 9047 doesn't exist, and yet, when I unpacked my suitcase, folded at the bottom underneath my clothes was her sun hat, still damp, still cold. In July of 2023, I took a week-long Alaskan cruise with my younger brother, Kyle. It was a birthday gift for him. He had always wanted to see glaciers and whales. The ship was massive and luxurious, a floating city cutting through ice-cold waters. We had a standard balcony room on deck 7, and everything about the trip felt like it would be unforgettable in the best way. That is, until the 5th night, when Kyle disappeared for 3 hours without explanation. We'd been having dinner at one of the fancier restaurants on board, seated near a window where the sunset stretched endlessly across the northern sea. Kyle excused himself around 7:45 p.m. to use the restroom, and I didn't think anything of it until 30 minutes passed. Then an hour. By the time dessert had come and gone and there was still no sign of him, I started to worry. I checked the restrooms, the lounges, even our stateroom. Nothing. At 11 p.m. I went to guest services. They offered to page him, but nothing came of it. Finally, at around 11:20, I saw him stumbling toward our room from the opposite end of the hall. His face was pale and he was soaked in sweat despite the air conditioning. He looked like he hadn't just gotten lost, but like something had truly terrified him. When I asked where he'd been, he couldn't give a straight answer. He said he got turned around, trying to get back from the restroom, but there was a tremble in his voice, like he was holding something back. Later that night, when I pressed him again, he finally admitted he had taken the elevator to the wrong deck. He said he stepped out onto what he thought was deck 2, but the walls were unfinished, the lights were buzzing overhead, and the air smelled like rust and seawater. There were no signs, no crew, no passengers, just metal, pipes and flickering lights. And then he said something that made my stomach turn. He said there was a hallway marked Deck 0. He had never seen it before. It wasn't on any ship map, wasn't listed in the elevator options. It only appeared when the elevator lights glitched and briefly flashed D0 before the doors opened. He said he walked into the hallway out of curiosity, but the air immediately felt off, not cold, pressurized, like something was pushing in on him from all sides. He heard movement in the walls, not mice or pipes, something heavier. He saw shadows that didn't match his own, and then he heard what sounded like sobbing coming from behind a closed door. He turned to leave, but the hallway seemed longer than before. Every step he took made the ship feel bigger, more hollow. Eventually, he found an emergency stairwell and climbed up until he was back at Deck 3, where everything looked normal again. He hadn't been able to explain the time gap or how he ended up on the opposite end of the ship. The next day, I decided to check it out myself. I waited until late at night when the halls were empty and took the elevator down. Deck 2 lit up on the panel like normal, but this time, when I pressed and held the button, the lights flickered, and I swear for a half-second D0 blinked onto the screen. The elevator shook slightly, then descended farther than I thought possible. When the doors opened, I was hit with an immediate wave of heat and a chemical smell, like something long sealed off had been breached. The floor was exposed steel, the walls lined with industrial piping. It looked like a part of the ship no one was ever meant to see. I stepped out slowly, my footsteps echoing sharply. There were no room numbers, no signs, just a single narrow corridor. I passed what looked like abandoned equipment, stacked chairs, a broken lifeboat harness, and bins of old uniforms with logos from an older cruise line name I didn't recognize. Everything was coated in dust, except for one thing, a child's rubber ball, bright red, sitting perfectly centered in the hallway. That's when I heard it. A dragging sound, slow and deliberate, like someone pulling something heavy across the floor. I turned, expecting to see someone from maintenance, but the hallway behind me was empty and darker than it had been. The dragging sound came again, closer this time. I backed away and turned toward the elevator, but it was gone. The hallway behind me had somehow changed. The door had disappeared, replaced by a seamless steel wall. The sound was just around the corner now, and then I heard a voice, small, shaky. A woman's voice whispering my name, not shouting, not calling, whispering. I ran. I don't remember how far. The hallway felt like it stretched endlessly, with the temperature rising and the air getting thicker. Just when I thought I was about to black out, I stumbled through a door marked Service Access, kicked it open and found myself in the crew kitchen. They looked shocked to see me. A security officer escorted me back to my room, asking if I'd been drinking, if I'd gotten lost. When I mentioned Deck 0, his expression changed. He didn't say a word the rest of the walk back. That night, Kyle and I packed our bags. We stayed up until sunrise, neither of us saying much, just watching the water roll past. After we disembarked, I checked old ship schematics online. The vessel had originally belonged to a different line, repurposed decades ago. And in the oldest blueprints I could find, there was indeed a service Deck 0. It had been sealed after a fire in 1983. Reports said the fire started mysteriously in a storage room. No one had been allowed down there since. The report ended with a chilling detail. 3 crew members were never found. One of them was a woman who, according to her file, was last heard whispering through the ship's intercom system just before it went silent. Cruise ships promise escape, but sometimes they take you somewhere far darker than you imagined. If these stories left you unsettled, make sure to like, share, subscribe and hit the bell icon because what's waiting below deck might still be watching.